Hello, everyone. My name is Alex. I'm a cloud solution architect, and also I'm volunteering as a Microsoft open source community lead. A global open source community lead. So please ask me anything in chat or in using email about open source in Microsoft. I will be super happy to answer your questions or help you with open source in your company. Today, I want to share with you some information about how to navigate Microsoft and GitHub ecosystem for open source developers and open source infrastructure specialists, because I actually personally do not divide the open source users into infrastructure specialists and developers. Usually, the border is quite low between these categories. So I will touch both of these categories and will not talk kind of about only infrastructure specialists or only about open source developers. So what I'm going to talk about today. So first, I'll love to start such talks with looking back with contribution areas where we are contributing a few words, a few slides about history of Microsoft and open source. Then this deck will be infused this and there, and then with open source at Microsoft and GitHub. So I will not have kind of dedicated section for Microsoft, dedicated section for GitHub. I will talk about everything. And strategy topics, strategy teams, how Microsoft does open source, why Microsoft does open source, and how to navigate our huge ecosystem for open source users. A look inside the process. That will be a sneak peek, because a lot of details are, of course, NDA'd, but we have also a public resource that describe a little about how we are developing our open source and our open source components, how we are doing inner source, how we are govern this process, and all of these things. And of course, one of the most strategic topics nowadays and for the last years, and it's becoming more and more hot, is supply chain security. Doing security at a scale, doing security going back from the right to the left, as GitHub folks like to say, how to secure the development, the infrastructure deployment process, not only in our infrastructure, but also on a second party, third party, fifth party, or whatever. So switching back security from right to left. So a few words about Microsoft and Linux. Yep. So it is super important. This slide is super important, but I would like to highlight only one thing here, is that one of three of Microsoft own cloud usage runs on Linux. And what it means? It means that a lot of Microsoft services, a lot of internal services that are not available to our customers are being run on Linux. What does it mean? It means that if we are doing that, we are contributing back to the community. And it shows, it usually results in a lot of news, a lot of announcements from Microsoft. Something like I will touch this in a few seconds, or in a minute. So how to navigate that? Because from one standpoint, it could look positive that Microsoft is doing a lot of things in open source, but from another angle, you may find yourself a little lost in the meaning of that. Why we are doing that? And the answer is quite clear. We are users of open source, and we have so many people working on open source. Internally, we have a lot of upstream developers. We have, as far as I know, we have even Linux kernel contributors in Microsoft. And it means that we will do a lot, and it's inevitable. So I will talk about this a little later about how to understand what we are doing. And our history of using and doing open source spans more than 12 years. It started, I don't even know when, but it was definitely before 2001. And since that, we did a lot. And of course, it was accompanied by culture changes because open source is a culture. Yep. And in Microsoft, I started to work in Microsoft 7 years ago, and it completely changed its open source culture, its culture of contribution internally and externally. And one simple example is 7 years ago, if my customer or partner would ask me, for example, about some product, I don't know, maybe about .NET or whatever, what is the future of this? Or how, when product group is going to fix this issue? I would not, there was a big chance that I would not able to answer this question. Today, I just say that, or I'm going by myself to the GitHub, where many of our product groups are publishing our public roadmaps and talking with users, or just say to my partner that, hey, this is a GitHub repository for Azure. You can just go and ask. And this is phenomenal because this is a sign of culture changes. And that was that was done in last, I don't know, maybe 10 years, but it was started a long ago. And last year was super busy. And last year was super busy for everyone, of course, because of us going more and more virtual. And as you see, a lot of security on this slide. Security in these virtual times became super crucial, super critical, and we started to participate. We announced a lot, and I will not, of course, go one by one, but in general, this is Microsoft is doing a lot, and we are doing this with a structure. And I'm going to touch this structure and directions a little later. And of course, 2012, last year, was great, but this year was even more cool, I would say, because for me as a Java developer, I would never think that Microsoft would announce its own Java distribution. And why we announce it? Because we want to compete with Oracle, maybe. I don't know. But what I see from internal, these folks who announced this, we have Java product group, Java and Azure product group. They are doing a lot of things about Java in Azure. And what they see is that they want to secure all of the supply chain, as I mentioned in the beginning, this strategic topic of Microsoft right now. They want to secure all of these things. They want to have their own build. They want to have everything on their own. And this is one of the reasons why we released this Java distribution. For our, first, for our own security of internal services and underlying Azure infrastructure, but also we released that to the open source for anyone who would prefer this build over other builds. But we do not kind of navigate any of the customers towards this build, because this is up to a customer or partner to use this or that. And of course, one of the hot and buzz, I would say, but super cool things that was released this year, and you're probably aware of our work around Rust. That Rust is going to be kind of one of the development languages for Android, for Linux, kernel, for I don't know even for what, but I think that it's everywhere. And we also closed the gap with the Rust for Windows. And this actually, again, this is a continuation of our internal work that we needed it to work internally, but then we realized that it would be cool, it would be useful for our ecosystem to work on that. And we released that on the GitHub, so you can go, you can download, you can contribute, you can and if your contribution will be kind of merged, then you will be a contributor of Windows maybe in some time of the future. So all of this follows open source contributions at Microsoft. We have some kind of strategic areas where we are investing a lot. Linux, cloud native, data and AI, languages, and web. So I'm not going to cover a lot of Linux, but to name a few, our strategic topics of Linux investments are where we are investing super actively, super heavily, is secure hardware enablement. So if you have a TPM or whatever, yep. So this is a topic of our investment. Testing thousands of images at scale. How to do so we have a lot of Linux customers in Azure. We need to ensure that if one of the customers want to deploy, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of Red Hat or Ubuntu or whatever Linux, it will be fine. And it will be fast. It will be reliable. So one of our investment that you can see a lot of news about is how we are doing this at a scale. We are usually publishing our learnings in our blogs, so you can benefit from that as well. Network storage scenarios and security at scale. So network storage scenarios is clear. SMB3, CIFs, NFS. We are active contributors of this framework. We contribute a lot of testing frameworks back to the community. So you can see a lot of this news around Microsoft. But in general, we have a community of Linux users in Microsoft. So this is something that we are using by ourselves, and this is very important to understand. So if you're a Linux user, you will be fine in Microsoft. Cloud native. Cloud native is all about, usually is all about Kubernetes nowadays, but we try to extend this topic with more technologies, and we are trying to extend these technologies like Kubernetes from cloud to the edge, which means that devices around you, close to you, can use this stuff. So we have a lot of stuff released, and I'm going to cover a few of them a little later. Data and AI usually is about working with data and AI vendors. We have some data tools for developed by us, of course, but we also understand that we need open source technologies to be supported in Azure, in Microsoft, and we are heavy users of many open source technologies in Microsoft. And of course, languages and web, I think I will not cover these two topics because we are just contributors, and you can see a lot of announcements, and TypeScript, for example, or Rust or Java are super comfortable blogs to read. So you can just go and read. And recently, Python founder was joined us with one awesome. So I would consider this as a sign of future Python coolness in with regard to Microsoft. So a few more words about data and AI. How to navigate, how to understand our investments and open source developers, open source development with regard to the data and AI. So our data and AI investments are following the simple model. We are developing tooling which covers all of the stages of data and data processing, storage, etc. So ingestion, storage, preparation, serving, and reporting. All of this, of course, is covered by Microsoft tools, and we actually one of the important thing here is to mention is that all of these tools usually are somewhat based on open source, and it means that we are contributing back to the community. And but it does not mean that what you need is not available on Azure. You can just take each of the stage and replace with the open source equivalent, which is cool because all of this is tested. And if you are going to look for this information, you should just go and download data platform reference architecture, and you should be fine because we are trying to support all of the open source instruments that are being heavily used in the industry. What we are adding to that is not technology, but ethics. And going back a few slides, I want to machine learning and ethics, because I did not have this in the slides, but I think that is super important. Because technology is a technology. It has no negative or positive, but it's about people who are using that. So any of these technologies can be used in a negative way. And of course, in a positive way, which is much more popular, but negative is also a super important problem nowadays. And machine learning is one of the most, I would say, critical areas right now that we are working now in terms of ethics and how it's being used. We are contributing back, and we are working hardly on technical components, on the governance components that would not allow to use your machine learning model or to use machine learning data in a negative way. For example, if you are publishing your machine learning data, results, it can be matched with real people, and it's gonna harm you. Probably it's gonna harm these people because they can be traced back, asked, or I don't know. So you can find some developments that we did in this field about ethics on the GitHub, and you can apply these developments to your project, to your data, in order to make it more. I would say the fuzzy is not the right word because it has another connotation in machine learning, but much more harder to correlate the data and real people. This is just one of the examples of how we are working on the data and AI, apart from the releasing and contributing back to the community. Another cool thing that we are doing is PostgreSQL, and you see here a storage. Yep, PostgreSQL, MariaDB, MySQL. Recently, we welcomed Cassandra to this family, managed Cassandra, and but super exciting feature of that we are usually talking a lot for PostgreSQL users is Cytos, or Hyperscale, which is an extension for PostgreSQL that makes your database, that makes your PostgreSQL distributed. And this is a complex technology, but if you are running a big database, complex database, or databases, and you want to distribute it, you can run it in a managed mode in Azure. And of course, some of the findings were contributed back to the PostgreSQL community, but in general, yeah, it looks like this. And of course, we are. If you will go and try to understand what is going on with data and AI stack in Microsoft, you will see first managed options, because whenever we can, we are doing a managed option, and host your own application. But as I said, you can replace each of the stage with your own component, which is first, which is of course cool about Azure, but also shows that our contribution back to the community. Next, languages and web. I promised not to tell a lot about that, but I can't miss one of the my favorite examples of what we are doing around open source is .NET, our flagship product that was released a long ago, had a long way through the open source. And we open sourced a lot of things like WinForms, WPF, and who would think that WPF could be open sourced? But what is even more important is that we helped to found .NET Foundation. And .NET Foundation is all about future of .NET. Of course, current state and a future. And if you want to contribute to the .NET, you can go to the GitHub and contribute whenever you want. But also you can research the topic about .NET Foundation, and maybe apply your learning or your research to the goodness of .NET Foundation. During this journey, we not just open sourced .NET, but also we have found that we can do something about Visual Studio. And it's not about, of course, open sourcing of Visual Studio. It's about Visual Studio Code, which is one of the most favorite development tools right now on GitHub and the industry. And it was born as a process of working with .NET from the open source angle, which developers just started with something that's super simple, and then they released a first version, and then it was like a boom with the development. And nowadays, you see, if you want to download Visual Studio Code, you will see a lot of traction around that. So, cloud native. We talked about data and AI. We talked about language and web. But my personal favorite is cloud native. Cloud native is, of course, one of the hottest topics nowadays. But what is it about? A lot of discussions are here about what cloud native is. And CNCF, which is Cloud Native Computing Foundation, recently released a cloud native dictionary, and you can go and read it and try to understand how to explain it to your kid what cloud native is. But for me and for many of us in Microsoft, cloud native is about culture. And culture about cloud native, we are enterprise, we are big enterprise companies. So what we are trying to do, we are trying to make cloud native technologies more enterprise friendly. So if you see something like Dapper, which is event-driven portable runtime for microservices, or Open Application Model, or ACRI, which is Kubernetes for the edge, or Open Source Mesh, it's something that we have found that it's good to use for us, but also we identified that it will be helpful for enterprise. So I'm being asked all the time why we why we need another open source mesh, why we need Dapper, why we need something else. And usually, yeah, of course, it's not it's unlikely that these things will be kind of industry standard for everyone, for enterprise, for small business, for individual developers, etc. So it depends on the scenario. In the enterprise scenario, these cloud native things are working very good. And but also we have found together with our partners from the industry that with regard to one of the most hot topics in the cloud native service mesh, we lack some standardization because we have so many service meshes. We have these service meshes are being done in different languages, in different paradigm, with a sidecar container, without sidecar container, with this and that technology, with I don't know, with Prometheus integrated or without Prometheus. So of course maybe it's good, but there will be nothing wrong to have a standard that would work for enterprise. And this is something that is working. We are working very hard with our colleagues from the from our open source mesh project. And also we try to contribute our components that we are using by ourselves back to the community. This is just a short list of our own or projects that we are actively participating in that we contributed back to the community. I would recommend anyone who is working with a Kubernetes to take a look at that, at all of these components. Not because I'm an employee of Microsoft, but because I think that this is something that is really provides a value in, of course, in some scenarios. So, for example, virtual kubelet. I worked a few times with partners who had Kubernetes locally, but also they wanted to do a burst into the cloud Kubernetes. In our case, it was Azure Kubernetes service. So by default, you can not just go and take a lot of resources from AKS to your local Kubernetes. But if you are using virtual kubelet, you can masquerade your cloud AKS and your cloud Azure Container Instances, which is another service that provides you with serverless containers. And you can burst, you can take more resources as they would be local resources. And there will be just no difference because you're still using kubectl or KIDA. KIDA is another great service that I recommend to everyone who are working with the scalable systems that should react to the big load. KIDA extending, scaling, scalability functions of Kubernetes by rules engine. So if you want to scale your Kubernetes using I don't know, Kafka or some maybe even more complex things, then KIDA is the way to go here. And of course, not to mention Helm, Brigade, which is a JavaScript event-driven thing, and other things like I don't know, VS Code integration with Kubernetes, Gatekeeper, Open Policy Agent, and all of these things. So how to navigate through that? If you want to follow what we are doing in terms of cloud native community, you should look for something that is called Microsoft Upstream contributions. If you will look it into your search engine, then you will find a lot of talks by our active upstream contributors like Ralph Squillaci, Karen Chu, and Brandon Burns and other people. So if you want to look for that, then these people and these keywords are for you, because these people are just working on sometimes experimental projects for external ecosystem based on what is our learning inside of the Microsoft. For example, one of the most craziest in a positive sense projects that I ever saw is a Crustlet, which is a Rust for Kubernetes. Definitely check this out. It's in as far as I remember, this is in a super alpha state, but also it may be a future, and WebAssembly, Rust, and all of these things is something that we definitely are taking a heavy look at, and we are trying to research this field. So going back to the more general topic is if you want to understand what company with open source is going through about our experience, I encourage you to look for 4 open source lessons for 2021 blog post, which was written by one of our open source programs office members, and that which is identifying our strategic areas for invest in the 2021. First is working with others, of course, community, industry partners. We cannot do everything by ourselves, so we are heavily investing into working with others. Innovation with intention. It means that we are not doing something because we want to do something. We are always trying to align what we're doing with the community. Supply chain security and open communication, which is concludes accountability, mindshare sharing, and all of these things. So for these, we of course can use a blog post for communicating our vision, but also we are investing into participation in different foundations. And to name a few, Linux Foundation, we are active member of Linux Foundation, we are active member of OpenJS Foundation, Cloud Native Foundation, of course, and many others. But one of the most, I would say, interesting for this presentation would be Open Source Security Foundation. Last years showed that we have a lot to care about security in open source, and of course it's proprietary software as well, but open source as well. And we joined Open Source Security Foundation, and we are working with them on kind of developing, using our learnings, our experience, how to secure open source projects. So if you're developing an open source project, definitely check it in because this is going to be important, and this is going to be part of our daily life. And one of our components of this strategy is GitHub. So I talked briefly in GitHub in the beginning, but also GitHub is a platform by itself. And I will not touch any cool things like collaboration, like inner source and DevOps, but I want to touch super briefly one of the most important things that GitHub provides, and we are actively working on with the GitHub on that, is a DevSecOps and supply chain security. So if you're working on supply chain security or DevSecOps, you need to work on all of these bullets, because all of these bullets will compromise your deployment in case of kind of lack of attention. Physical and virtual data security, where, how, and how many where and how data is being stored and how it's being protected in terms of physical, virtual, firewalls, whatever. Identification and localization of data, where it's being stored, how to identify who is using that, who is passing that over. Management and sharing of data, how to ensure that we have data there and we need to put it here, and how to ensure that we are pulling out correct data from correct sender. Fraud, of course, a lot of fraud, and third-party security. And all of this is covered by GitHub. All of these categories are covered on GitHub. And here I have a reference architecture that is including Azure as well. And it includes such great services. One of my favorites, like Azure Policy, that you can use, for example, to ensure to use a GitOps paradigm, and for ensure that your deployment, be it a Kubernetes server or whatever, virtual machine or whatever, is satisfying some security baseline. But also I want to highlight here one of the most, I would say, popular nowadays instruments, GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions allows you to securely set up the secure project, the secure deployment project, and secure it all of the parties during the pipeline project, but also add some partners offerings like Trivy, like Aqua Security, like many other, in order to secure not just kind of credentials or whatever, but also container images and code by itself, static analysis. All of this stuff can be done only by GitHub Action, and combined with other instruments that it will allows you to set up set up the pipeline that is more or less fully secured. And it's not about Microsoft, it's not about GitHub. You can just use GitHub Action and, for example, Azure App Service, but everything else from other vendors, which is cool because it allows us to choose. And this is all about choice. So it lists a lot of other instruments, like one of my favorites is, of course, GitHub has a lot of options to host, but also they announced recently GitHub AE, which is a managed, super isolated instance of a GitHub. This is something that we are working closely with the GitHub on, and sometimes using that. But if you have a need of isolated code infrastructure, then GitHub AE is definitely worth to assess. And some of our policies, some of our projects, how we are contributing back, how we are doing that, they're listed on opensource.microsoft.com. Many do not know about this website, but if you're planning to use open source in your company, go to the opensource.com. It has tons of useful information for you to consider, be it open source or inner source. It has Microsoft projects. It has, by the way, FOSS fund, which is where we are selecting, nominating a project of open source and then voting for them, and then it receives a sponsorship award. But also a lot of internal things, which components we are using, which projects we are using, and how we are using that. And this is very important, and it concludes my talk by very important thing, that open source is about sharing and caring. And one of our strategic topics that I identified in the very beginning is that our strategic direction in Microsoft is to share as much as possible with the community. Thank you. Giving back microphone to you guys.